fourth grade. Our next step with working with fractions is we are going to be converting our fractions and what we know about fractions into decimals and also percentages. So what you already know when you're working with a fraction is if you saw this fraction, 5/10. 5/10 is also the same as this, but it's also the same as this. So fractions can convert between decimals and percentages. We're also going to be working with fractions that have tenths and hundredths to convert them between decimals and percentages. So if I had a fraction that looked like this, 13/100ths, my decimal would look like this, 13/100ths, and my percent would be this. So we're going to be able to, by the time we're done this, you're going to be able to go between all three and convert them using tenths and hundredths. Okay, fourth grade, this is your place value chart. You guys are already experts with the ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands place, all the way up to 100,000, 10,000, millions. You guys can do all of that, no problem. But what I'm going to be asking you to do now is when we use this little dot here, this decimal, is we are going to be discussing the number 1 to the right of the decimal, which is the tenths, and the one that is 2 to the right, which is called the hundredths. So you're going to need to be familiar with the tenths and the hundredths.
As you go through your day, driving to school or to sports practice, using a cell phone or an iPad, installing software for a computer game, or even raising money for charity, you are surrounded by pictures showing you fractions, decimals, and percents. With a quick glance, you know when a glass is full, half full, or nearly empty. When you see a battery icon, you can tell whether it's completely charged, half charged, or exactly a quarter. Because you know these things automatically, you can see for yourself that decimals, fractions, and percents give you different ways of stating the same information. You can show the parts of a pizza or the parts of a group the same way. When you see any fraction, decimal, or percent, remember that you can express it in 2 other ways.
Now that we know the basics of how decimal numbers work, let's see how we can write some special fractions using decimal numbers. I'm going to call these fractions base 10 fractions because their bottom numbers are all powers of 10, like 10, 100, or 1,000. Let's start with this fraction, 1/10. Well, you should recognize that it's one of our building blocks, and this should be easy to write down as a decimal number because we have a number place just for counting tenths. So all we have to do is put a 1 in the tenths place, like this. 0.1. Now when you write decimal numbers, it's important that you always include the ones place. But since we don't have any ones, we just put a 0 in that spot. The 0 makes the decimal point easier to see. Alright, so that's 1/10. But what if we have 2/10 instead? Well, all we have to do is change the digit in the tenths place to a 2. So 2/10 equals 0.2. In fact, we can keep counting tenths like this. 3/10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and finally 10/10. But look what happened when we got to 10/10. Now we don't have a digit for 10, so we had to use the next number place over, the ones place. But that makes sense because if you have the fraction 10/10, that makes a whole, and the value is just 1. Of course, we don't really need the 0 in the tenths place to write 1, but as long as the decimal point's there, at least we won't confuse it with 10. Alright, tenths are pretty easy, but what about hundredths? Let's start with the hundredths building block, 1 over 100. To write that as a decimal, we simply put a 1 in the hundredths place. We also need to put a 0 in the tenths place to act as a placeholder and show that we have no tenths. And we still need to put a 0 in the ones place as usual. Next, let's try 2 hundredths. For that, we simply put a 2 in the hundredths place. Let's keep on counting with hundredths just like we did for tenths. 3 hundredths, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 hundredths. Ah, but look what happened when we got to 10 hundredths. Just like before, we have to use the next number place to the left, the tenths place. This happens because any time you have 10 of a building block, they combine to form one of the next biggest building block. For example, 10 hundredths is a tenth, 10 tenths is a 1, 10 ones is a 10, and 10 tens is 100. Now the next fraction after 10 over 100 is 11 over 100. Now if you think about it, you'll see that 11 hundredths is really just a combination of 10 hundredths and 1 hundredth. Knowing that will help us write it as a decimal. Because a group of 10 hundredths is equal to 1 tenth, we put a 1 in the tenths place. And we still have that 1 hundredth left over, so we put a 1 in the hundredths place. There, 11 over 100 is just 0.11 as a decimal. Fortunately, you don't have to break up the fraction into tenths and hundredths each time. Anytime you have a 2-digit number over 100, all you have to do is put those digits into the tenths and hundredths place of your decimal number. Let's look at a few more examples to help you see the pattern. 24 over 100 would be 0.24. 32 over 100 would be 0.32. 78 over 100 would be 0.78. And 99 over 100 would be 0.99.